Welcome to the NC Everything Podcast. I'm your host, Curtis, and this is a bi-weekly show where I talk about everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. Thank you all for listening today. It's a beautiful Sunday morning. I think this is March 29th or 30th. I'm recording this on the Sunday that it goes out. I've been really busy. It's springtime. It's planting season, so it's been harder for me to get the podcast done on Saturday. I've been doing them on Sundays. I apologize for that. But it's still a bi-weekly show. But yes, it's been a beautiful weekend out here. I've done a lot of planting. And I've really been looking forward to these warm days. I'm glad they're finally here. But this isn't a weather podcast. It's a history podcast. And I got a pretty good one for you, I think. But before I get into it, I wanted to mention something. And I'm not making light of this. I don't necessarily think it's funny, but it's very unusual. Last year, I covered the terrible flood caused by a hurricane that hit western North Carolina. This terrible disaster was 1916. Well, while I was recording that show right over here, and I knew that a hurricane was on the way, while I was recording that show, it started raining on me. And that weekend, over the course of that weekend, Hurricane Helene hit western North Carolina, and we all know how bad that was. Now, fast forward a little ways. A few episodes ago, I covered a bunch of different fires in Winston-Salem. Some of the worst fires Winston-Salem has ever seen. And literally 2 days later, I found out that the Texas Pete plant or warehouse in Winston-Salem burnt. I don't know if it burnt down, but it caught on fire. And I thought, that's crazy. I cover a flood, and a huge flood occurs, and now I cover a fire, and this terrible fire occurs. The next episode I did was Michael Jordan. And I found out from some family that the band Disturbed was on a concert in Chicago, Illinois, and they accidentally set on fire and destroyed a Michael Jordan jersey. And so, honestly, I was a little weary. I don't want to cover anything that's going to get messed up. But that leads me to this episode. I was reading through something. I don't even remember what it was now, and I seen something about the stolen copy of North Carolina's Bill of Rights. Wow, that's interesting. And so I read it, and it's a pretty good story, I think. And also, though, more importantly, I think now, by the end of the story, you'll realize I don't think anything bad can happen to the North Carolina copy of the Bill of Rights. So maybe I'll break my curse. I think we'll be okay. However, if something this weekend, well, the weekend's over, if something next week happens to the North Carolina copy of the Bill of Rights, I'm really sorry, and I'll probably stop recording podcasts at that point because something is definitely wrong. Anyway, let's get on into it. So this episode is going to start with the history of the copy of Bill of Rights. Because honestly, I didn't know there was more than one copy of the Bill of Rights. Sue me. I failed civics class the first time. I blame the teacher. Anyway, I didn't know there was multiple copies, so we're going to kind of go through that, and then I'm just going to tell this story. So it starts in 1788. North Carolina leaders meet in Hillsborough from July 21st to August 4th, and they're discussing ratifying the U.S. Constitution and becoming a state of the United States. However, the Constitution gets rejected. North Carolina said they weren't happy with it. They felt that the Constitution gave too much power to the government and not enough power to the people. And they said they weren't going to join the United States until some amendments were made to give more power to the people. And so this part most people may know, but James Madison, he drafted up the Bill of Rights, and Congress approved it. And when they wrote up when James Madison wrote up the Bill of Rights, probably after Congress approved it, he made 14 copies of the Bill of Rights. And so these 14 copies, one was for the federal government, one was for the 11 states that were locked in as United States, and there was 2 copies for the 2 states that were kind of on the fence. That was North Carolina and Rhode Island. And so George Washington, he sends out a copy, one of each of these 14 copies of the Bill of Rights to each of the states and would-be states. And he also sent a personal letter with each copy. Now, when the General Assembly of North Carolina got their copy of the Bill of Rights and Washington's letter, the docket clerk actually made a few notes on the back of the copy of the Bill of Rights. Now, you think about writing on a copy of the Bill of Rights now, it seems, horrible. But again, back then it was like any other letter you might get in the mail. It may not have seemed as important as it does today. But the document clerk did make notes on the back edge. Keep that in mind. Lock it into your memory. It's going to come back later. Well, the General Assembly, they read the Bill of Rights. Everybody seemed pretty happy, so they had a second North Carolina convention, and the wind's blowing out here. And on November 21st, 1789, the delegates ratified the Constitution, making North Carolina the 12th state of the United States of America. Now we'll fast forward 76 years to the spring of 1865. The United States has been quite ununited, and the Civil War has been trudging on for the past 4 years. But the Civil War just came to an end. So there's this Union soldier in Raleigh, and probably at that time there was a bunch of Union soldiers in Raleigh. But one soldier in particular, and I didn't get his name, he was tasked with guarding the North Carolina Capitol. So he finds out the war's over, Lee surrendered, and he's ordered to go home. Well, before he goes home, he starts kind of snooping around the Capitol building. He's looking for some sort of door prize or some treasure, some souvenir to take home with him. And he comes across our copy of the Bill of Rights. He seems pretty happy with it, so he rolls it up, puts it in his pocket. He takes off back to Ohio. And of course, he would be an Ohioan. Specifically, he goes home to Tippecanoe, Ohio. And I guess by the time he arrived home, his treasure didn't seem very treasured anymore. So he sells it to a guy from Indiana named Charles Shotwell for $5. And I looked it up. $5 in 1865 is about $100 today. Well, it didn't take long before North Carolina realized their Bill of Rights was gone. And I'm not sure how they figured out that Shotwell had it, but a newspaper story about Shotwell, it kind of caught the attention of the North Carolina Secretary of State, Cyrus Thompson. And this was in 1897. So Cyrus Thompson, he reaches out to Shotwell. And again, I'm not sure how they figured out he had it. I couldn't find anything on that. For the most part, it stayed pretty mysterious. But our Secretary of State, Cyrus Thompson, reaches out to this guy, Shotwell, and pretty much just asks him to return the Bill of Rights. And Shotwell says he's not going to do it, not unless he gets paid for it. Well, North Carolina wasn't willing to pay him for it, but they reach out to the Indiana Secretary of State, and they ask for help. But Indiana wasn't really in the helping mood that day, so nothing really happened, and North Carolina kind of just gave up. Well, that guy Shotwell, he dies, and he leaves our copy of the Bill of Rights to his son, who I didn't get his name, but I'll just call Junior. Don't worry, he won't be in the story very long. Well, 1925, Junior, like his daddy, tries to make a little bit of money off this copy of the Bill of Rights. So he gets somebody who represents him to write North Carolina and says, hey, we got your Bill of Rights. We'll give it back to you for a price. Call it a finder's fee. Well, North Carolina said they're not going to use tax dollars to purchase stolen goods. They told him where he could stick it. And so nothing really happened there. Well, then Junior, he leaves the Bill of Rights to his daughters, which is the original Shotwell's granddaughter. So now it's the 90s. And the daughters, the granddaughters of the original Shotwell, they attempted to have the documents, the Bill of Rights, sold by Sotheby's. And I really wasn't sure what Sotheby's was or Sotheby's, so I Googled it. Turns out Sotheby's is a British-founded multinational corporation and one of the world's largest auction houses and brokers of fine and decorative art, jewelry, and collectibles, which is headquartered in New York. Or it has a headquarters in New York anyway. So essentially, the granddaughters, they try to sell our copy of the Bill of Rights through this auction house. Well, the auction house ultimately didn't want to do business with them because reportedly this copy of the Bill of Rights was stolen. And, they didn't want to get their hands dirty. Well, the granddaughters, they decide they're going to rid themselves of this Bill of Rights one way or another. And so they sold the copy of the Bill of Rights to an antique dealer named Wayne Pratt for $200,000. Wayne Pratt does come back. Remember his name. In fact, he'll probably come back here in just a little bit. Then one thing to note, I want to put it in here before I forget. Wayne Pratt apparently was a regular guest on the Antiques Roadshow. And if you've never watched Antiques Roadshow, I feel bad for you. You should go correct that. Antiques Roadshow is awesome. But this antique dealer, Wayne Pratt, was a regular on the Antiques Roadshow. And he's the one that purchased our stolen copy of the Bill of Rights for $200,000. Well, Wayne Pratt, he knew he had some trouble on his hands when he got this thing, apparently, because he immediately tries to sell it. So he hires a lawyer to try to find a buyer of this stolen North Carolina Bill of Rights, and the lawyer's name was John L. Richardson. So the lawyer sets the asking price at $10 million, and he reaches out to North Carolina to see if they'll bite. But this lawyer was kind of smart about it. He wrote North Carolina anonymously, and he told him that he had it, and for $10 million, he'd sell it back to him. But he had a warning in his letter. He said, if you try to figure out who I am or try to find a Bill of Rights, it will be destroyed or taken out of the country. So his letter came with a threat. Well, the Secretary of State at that time, he responded like North Carolina had before and pretty much told this dirty lawyer where he could stick it. He said, we're not going to spend taxpayers' dollars on stolen property. Well, now it's 2003, and this thing is about to snowball up pretty good. Governor Ed Rendell of Pennsylvania gets Governor Mike Easley of North Carolina on the phone. He tells Easley that the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia was looking for a cool centerpiece for their new museum. Philadelphia had been given a chance to buy an original copy of the U.S. Bill of Rights. Philadelphia's governor tells Easley that this copy looks to be North Carolina's stolen copy. And this Philadelphia governor, he tells Mike Easley, he said, we can give North Carolinians limited access to the copy of Bill of Rights once we get it set up in our museum. And I'm not sure exactly what the terms of what he was offering with that. It sounded shady, but North Carolina, he told them to get lost. But now he had the attention of Governor Mike Easley, and that really wasn't a good thing to have. Mike Easley sends representatives from his staff, the Attorney General's office, and the state archives to the U.S. Attorney's office for the Eastern District of North Carolina. Now, they had one main question. Is there a way to get our copy of the Bill of Rights home? So they all started kind of brainstorming. Man, it's really windy out here. I can't hold all my papers. So the facts of the matter was that the Bill of Rights certainly was stolen and taken out of state. The law calls this interstate transportation of stolen property. So the U.S. Attorney tries to put together a seizure warrant. Keep in mind, right now, nobody really knows much of any of the details I've told you about this case. They learned it over time. All they really knew was that the guy that was trying to sell our copy of the Bill of Rights to Philadelphia, he was the same guy who sent the warning, threatening letter to Mike Easley. And they were really trying to be careful because of that threat that was made in the 90s. They were worried that if they messed around, that the copy of the Bill of Rights would be destroyed or taken out of the country. And so North Carolina finally gets Philadelphia on board, and they reach out to the museum officials, and the museum officials agreed to help. So here's the plan. They would agree to purchase this copy of the Bill of Rights at the time of the sale, and y'all have seen this on enough crime shows and movies probably, but at the time of the sale, at the time of the transaction, FBI agents would bust out and arrest the bad guys. And so Philadelphia finds himself an FBI agent named Robert Whitman. Whitman would pose as a negotiator and the middleman between the museum and the dirty lawyer. So he was able to get the dirty lawyer to lower the price of the Bill of Rights down to $4 million. And then he scheduled a meeting for the day of the sale for 5 days after that. So now we're at the sale day. The attorney, the dirty lawyer, Richardson, who represented Pratt, and remember, Pratt was the Antiques Roadshow guy. Richardson is the dirty lawyer. So the dirty lawyer, Richardson, he represents Pratt. He shows up and he comes out swinging. He wants to see the $4 million right away. And so the FBI agent, he shows it to him in the form of a check. Then he puts it back in his jacket. So then dirty lawyer, who's happy that he has the $4 million check, he tells another guy to break out the document, the Bill of Rights. And supposedly it came out in they brought out this giant box. And when they opened it, the Bill of Rights was in a big frame. And I'm not exactly sure how big the document actually is, but I've heard that it's sizable. So they pulled out this giant frame with the Bill of Rights in it, and the FBI agent, who's the seller, or the buyer, he had to confirm that it was a real deal and it wasn't a con. So pretty quickly he did confirm that this was a copy of the Bill of Rights. But you see, the problem was there were 3 other states missing their copy of the Bill of Rights: New York, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. So he had to make sure this was North Carolina's copy of the Bill of Rights. So going back toward the beginning of the show, you remember I said they made notes on the back edge of the document when they received it back in 1789. So the FBI agent takes apart part of the frame. He looks on the back of the document, and sure enough, there are the notes that were made back in 1789. So this was the real deal. Richardson, he was excited that this was the official stolen copy of the North Carolina Bill of Rights. So he reaches back in his jacket to get the $4 million check, but that's not what he comes out with. Instead, he comes out with a seizure warrant. Now, I'd like to say here that the dirty lawyer ran, and there was this big manhunt and chases and hell, maybe even a shootout. No, it wasn't nothing like that. They battled it out in court. That was all. Our copy of the Bill of Rights was flown back to North Carolina on a jet that belonged to then FBI Director Robert Mueller. So after 138 years, North Carolina's copy of Bill of Rights was home. In 2008, an order was entered that ended all claims on the Bill of Rights and declared North Carolina the rightful owner of the document. So nobody else could even come forward and claim it was theirs. And now it's locked in the state archives. And when I first read this, I was thinking, man, it'd be really cool to go see it after reading this cool story. I want to go see the Bill of Rights and just, stand close to it. History you can touch, kind of. But, I found out that after all this, it's now locked away in a vault. You can't see it, which is incredibly disappointing. And I'd like to think that the North Carolina, the NC Everything podcast show is so huge that I'll just call the archives. They'll give me a private viewing of it, but I don't think that's going to happen. Due to its age and just the condition, it has to stay protected. It did say that they bring the Bill of Rights out for special occasions, special events. So maybe I'll look forward to one of them and I can kind of see it. But that's the end of the story. And again, I thought it was a fantastic story. I don't know about Nicolas Cage National Treasure worthy, but for someone who didn't realize we even had our own personalized copy of the Bill of Rights, I certainly didn't know it was stolen. I feel like a great story. And again, I can't, with it being locked in a vault, I just can't imagine anything bad is going to happen to it. Not like Michael Jordan's jersey or Western North Carolina or the Winston-Salem Texas Pete plant. I feel like the Bill of Rights is going to be safe. It will survive my show. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you were as entertained by that story as I was. And since I'm running late and I want to get this show out to you as soon as possible, I'm going to wrap it up by saying I'll talk to you in a couple weeks.